Kennedy came about, that made a big difference. We'll talk about that. Okay, let's start over again. Andrew Johnson, the new President of the United States. As Bailey said, the new President agreed with a lot of President Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. We told you that President Johnson was a self-educated man. He didn't have any formal schooling. Can anybody tell me some of the political positions he held, starting with Nyabeth? Tell me a political position. The first one he held. Tell me that.
He was mayor of his community in Tennessee.
He was mayor of his community in Tennessee. Hannah, give me his next position.
Elected to the House of Representatives.
He was elected to the House from Tennessee. How about another one, Gracie?
He was the governor of Tennessee.
Governor of Tennessee. And Soraya, what was another political position within that state?
He was also the in the Senate.
He was in the Senate. So he had a ton of political experience before assuming the presidency. It's not like some idiot, became president. He also was very loyal to the Union, and he resisted secession when Tennessee seceded from the Union. He didn't always agree with Lincoln. He said he voted against him. He spoke against him. He sent his money to defeat him, but he still loved his country, and he loved the Constitution, and he insisted upon its guarantees. So he supported Lincoln once he was elected. And because of these political positions that we talked about, is the reason why he was chosen as vice president in 1860. Well, let's go to our next subtopic then, which is opposition to President Andrew Johnson. Now, as I mentioned, he had plans to carry out Reconstruction as Lincoln had stated. And he's going to face some serious opposition from Northerners, especially who? The Radical Republicans. Very good. And the Radical Republicans, which we've kind of stated in the past, saw the Lincoln-Johnson plan for Reconstruction as way too easy on the South. Okay, remember, they were more into punishing the South than preserving them into the Union. Now, many of the radical members of Congress actually believed that President Johnson didn't have the authority to decide about the defeated South. They didn't think he had the authority. They thought only who had the power to deal with the former Confederate states? Congress. Very good. So radical Republicans didn't believe that one man, even though he was the President of the United States, had the authority to decide on the fate of the South. They thought that Congress had the power to deal with restoring the former Confederate states. Now, the Congress was controlled by the Republican Party. And the radical Republicans outnumbered what was considered the moderate Republicans. So really, you had a Republican-controlled Congress with the radicals in control of that. Now, the radical Republicans in Congress were absolutely determined to defeat the Lincoln-Johnson plan for Reconstruction. They were absolutely determined. Which takes us to our next subtopic, which is the Northern-controlled Congress goes to work. So if the Republican Party is controlling Congress, where do most Republicans, if not all, live? In the North. Okay, so the Northern-controlled Congress goes to work. And they're going to pass some laws here. Some are good laws, and some are not so good, threatening laws. So since the Congress was under control of the Northern Republicans at this time, several acts were passed to guarantee their philosophy on Reconstruction. Okay? So again, because the Congress was under control of Northern Republicans, you're going to see some law passes that guarantee the North's philosophy concerning Reconstruction. The first one happened in April of 1866, and it was called the Civil Rights Act. April of 1866, and was referred to as the Civil Rights Act. Anybody know what this law granted? Pretty simple. Two things to blacks. Two things. Civil Rights Act. What two things did it grant blacks? What?
Right to vote.
Freedom.
Not the right to vote.
Citizenship.
Citizenship. They're already free. Citizenship and you and I are equality. So the Civil Rights Act that was passed in April of 1866 granted two things to blacks: citizenship and equality. And although Hannah said that wasn't right, it's a good thing to remember they already had their freedom by virtue of the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay? Now, who has to sign the bill into law? The President. Well, Johnson believes that this law, believe it or not, was unconstitutional, so he vetoed it. So it was passed over President Johnson's veto. If a president vetoes it, does it mean it doesn't become a bill? No, it just stands out that the president doesn't support such a piece of legislation. So Johnson thought that this Civil Rights Act that gave citizenship and equality to blacks was unconstitutional, and he vetoed it. So it was a law that was passed over Congress. Now we talked about Johnson's loyalty to the Union, right? Does that mean that he hated slavery? No. He thought slavery was okay, but he wanted to be loyal to the Union. He didn't believe that we should split or anybody should secede. Yeah.
If it gets vetoed, don't they pass it once and then send it to the president, and if he vetoes it, then they have to pass it with a high majority, like 2/3?
Later in history. Yeah, but not at this point. Later in history, that's right. Okay? All right, the second thing was passed in 1868, a very important piece of legislation in 1868, known as the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. This is something I think you might see on your AP test, maybe. The 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And it basically stated two things, the 14th Amendment. And it kind of piggybacked on the Civil Rights Act. Because the first thing that the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution stated was that all people in the United States are citizens of the United States. Okay, so it reiterated the citizenship thing for blacks. It stated that all people of the United States are citizens of the United States. Yeah.
Of the United States or in the United States?
Did I say that? But either way. Okay, not in would make sense because you might just be in the...
No,
all citizens of the United States. All citizens of the United States. People at the time that were living in the United States were citizens of the nation. What else did it give? Very important. Somebody said it before and it was just a little early. Yeah, it gave all male citizens, black or white, the right to vote. It gave all male citizens, black and white, the right to vote. Now, here's where the radical Republicans come into being. They make it clear that in order for a southern state to be readmitted into the Union, what do they have to do? Ratify and agree to this constitutional amendment. See how they got them? So if you want to get back into the United States, your Confederate state that seceded, in order to get back in, your state has to ratify that you agree to this constitutional amendment and that you will obey it. So that's what they did. So all southern states that want to be readmitted back into the Union had to ratify in each state to get in the fact that you would obey and live by the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Yep.
So what happens if they didn't? They already seceded, so where would they?
Well,
the state they didn't.
Do you think these southern states still want to be seceded? They have. It's a good question, but no, it's just a thing you can't be your own country. And people in those states had to make that. They just had to get back, and that's what they did. That's a good question, though.
So there was just no desire to not come back?
Well, I think you had citizens in some southern states that would like to fought the Civil War forever, but overall, you had no choice. You had to come back. You couldn't be a country on your own. Because you wouldn't get any, how would you survive, right? Okay? Now, if a state didn't, if a state agreed to this 14th Amendment, but then went and denied the black man the ability to vote, what do you think they did to that state? So the state says, yeah, we agree to the 14th Amendment, but when the rubber hits the road, when we have an election, we deny the black man the right to vote. What do you think would happen to a state that did that? They wouldn't send them back to the Confederacy. What would they do? They would reduce the number of representatives they had where? Congress. So if you accepted the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, then thought to yourself as a state, well, we just won't let those people vote anyway. We don't care. What are they going to do to us? Well, what they did is if you did that, they took away representatives in Congress, and then your state had less and less what? say, or power, that's good, yeah. So, it was a good plan, actually, and it worked pretty well. Now, who's not very happy about the 14th Amendment, other than people in the South?
The president.
Women should be. I mean, my God, the black man, who a lot of women don't see as equal, especially in the South, are going to get a vote before white women. So that caused a tremendous amount of bitter feelings between women in the United States and this amendment. Because a black man could vote, but a white woman couldn't. That did not go over real well, just so you know. One of the first women's rights leaders that stood up against the 14th Amendment was Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And when you go to the Capitol next year on your Capitol tour, you're going to see a bust of 3 prestigious women in the Capitol. One of those is going to be Elizabeth Cady Stanton. What do you think President Johnson's feeling was about the 14th Amendment? Absolutely, adamantly opposed it. He adamantly opposed the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Adamantly opposed it. So women were mad. Johnson opposed it. And they can't have the president opposing something like this. So what's the best thing the radical Republicans could do to make sure that the president didn't oppose it? What?
Let him pass this.
No? Well, kind of get rid of him. Compete your way out of the game. Out of the way. So, because of this, the radical Republicans in Congress set their sights on trying to remove Johnson from office. Now, the first thing they tried to do was defame him. What does that mean, Kylie? What if I'm going to defame you?
Ruin your reputation.
I'm going to ruin your reputation by saying things about you that probably aren't true, hoping everybody will believe it. One smart man once said, the bigger the lie, the more people that will believe it. You think about that. When rumors start, the bigger the lie, the more people believe it. So, they're trying to get him out of office. So they accuse him of a couple of things to try to defame him. Okay? First of all, they accuse him of being a drunkard in office. And where'd they get that from? The inauguration. And maybe he was a drunkard in office. I don't know. Alcohol's liquor was a lot different thing then. But they accused him openly of being a drunkard in office, being drunk in office all the time. They also accused him of having a harem of loose women in the White House, which are, another name for those are prostitutes, although prostitutes are someone that gets paid. They're basically saying they get a bunch of loose women in the White House that he dealt with. Yeah. So, the radical Republicans began to defame the president. They gave the following as 2 cruel examples. They said he was a drunkard of office and accused him of having a harem of loose women in the White House. Well, this really didn't get the job done. So Congress set their minds they would pass a law that would remove Johnson from office. And that famous piece of legislation is known as the Tenure of Office Act of 1867. Tenure of Office Act of 1867. This is a very important piece of legislation. The Tenure of Office Act of 1867, which is our next subtopic. Now I'm going to tell you a story before I get on this. I started this year and will continue next year to give a scholarship, an AP U.S. History 2 scholarship to one of you kids in here. You'll receive this a year from May. We're going to give it for the first time this year. And it's a universal scholarship that you have to follow all the universal scholarship guidelines, but the one thing you have to do is you have to write about a person in history that you admire and why. So I had about 11 applicants. And I'm not going to tell you who won or who didn't yet, because that'll be scholarship night. But I was very intrigued that one of the applicants wrote about someone that has to do with the Tenure of Office Act. And I was very shocked because I had this kid in my class last year, and I didn't know that this particular person and this particular topic made that kind of an impact. Who do they usually write about? John Kennedy. Or they'll write about Abraham Lincoln. Or they might dig down and write about Mike Mansfield, who you'll learn about. But for this kid to go back and talk about this individual, which we'll mention in a few minutes, I was astonished. I was just so impressed that I didn't realize it made that much of an impact on the kid, on this guy. But we'll get to that. Now, what the Tenure of Office Act did is it required the president to get the approval of the Senate before he could remove anyone from his cabinet. Okay, the Tenure of Office Act stated that the president had to get the approval of the Senate to remove anyone from his cabinet. Okay, the Tenure of Office Act stated again that the President of the United States had to get approval of the Senate before he could remove anyone from his cabinet. Who is the Senate controlled by? Radical Republicans. Now, why in the world would they pass that? Why would that get him in trouble?
Because he's removing.
No, he's not already. He's just about to, and they know it. Okay? So what this law is going to be doing is setting up President Johnson because they knew he was displeased with one particular member of his cabinet. Now, if you were watching the video really good, which we're going to go back to here, wasn't there a member of Lincoln's cabinet that was about to resign and Lincoln talked him out of it until after? Who was it? No?
What was the
Edwin Stanton. Okay? Now, the Radical Republicans knew that President Johnson did not like Edwin Stanton. And he wanted to get rid of him. He was a holdover from the Lincoln administration. And Johnson didn't like him. And they knew that he wanted to fire him, basically. They knew that. So they passed this Tenure of Office Act so that he would have to have Senate approval to get rid of Stanton, knowing him. Go ahead.
Is they related?
No, they are not. A good question. No. But they knew that he wanted to get rid of him. He was disloyal. Basically, Stanton was a spy for the Radical Republicans against Lincoln. Or excuse me, against Johnson. And Johnson hated him, and they knew that he wanted to get rid of him. So they passed this Tenure of Office Act, which stated that to get rid of a cabinet member, they had to have Senate approval. Well, when Johnson found out about this Tenure of Office Act, how did he react? He was pissed. And so he thought, by God, I will fire that bastard now. I'll fire him. No Congress is going to tell me what to do. Stanton, like I mentioned, was disloyal to President Johnson. He was serving as a spy for the Radical Republicans. Every move Johnson was making, he was reporting back to the Radical Republicans. And when Johnson found out about the Tenure of Office Act and the fact that he was disloyal, he was going to fire him. Okay? Well, Johnson believed that the Tenure of Office Act was unconstitutional. He didn't believe it. So obviously he vetoed it, which at the time didn't mean much. And after he vetoed it, he fired Stanton in February of 1868. Fired him without Senate approval. Okay? So he fired him in February of 1868. So since President Johnson believed the Tenure of Office Act was unconstitutional, he fired Stanton in February of 1868. This is exactly what the Radical Republicans wanted. And now they have a reason to remove him from office because he's not following the law. Okay? So, they have to accuse him of something. And they accuse him of, you should write this down, this is what they accuse him of, quote, committing high crimes and misdemeanors. You're going to hear this again in the 70s. High crimes and misdemeanors. So they accused him of committing, quote, high crimes and misdemeanors. You cannot do that if you're the president. You cannot commit high crimes and misdemeanors. But it gave them a reason to impeach President Johnson. Because he committed high crimes and misdemeanors, they had a reason to impeach him. What does impeaching somebody mean? No, that's what people think, removed from office. Impeaching him means you're accusing him of something that requires a trial. Very good. So if a president is impeached, that does not mean that he's been removed from office. It means he's been accused of high crimes and misdemeanors, and he will go on trial in an attempt to remove him from the presidency. That will take us to the next subtopic, which is the impeachment and trial of Andrew Johnson. So he's going to go on trial. We'll explain how this works. Have we had any other presidents impeached? Nixon was not. Good. He quit before they impeached him, and Bill Clinton was impeached. And we'll talk about it because he went through the same process here. Okay? So, listen up again. Under the United States Constitution, Congress can remove a president for committing high crimes and misdemeanors. And in such cases, the House of Representatives can impeach or accuse the president of such violations. And once a president has been impeached, a trial is held before the United States Senate. Okay?
Wait, so the House has to accuse him and then the trial is in front of the Senate?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, that is exactly correct. So the House of Representatives is the official body that impeaches, and the Senate tries. How's he doing on that?
Teachers and students, pardon the interruption. I know this is not normal, but please excuse the boys and girls track team so that way they can get on the road and get dressed. So please excuse the boys and girls track team at this time. Thank you.
Hey, if you want, it's up to you, but if you stay for 3 minutes, you'll get the point here. It's up to you, okay? Now, who's going to, you can go if you want, I'm not upset. Who's going to preside over the trial? Who's going to be the judge? Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So that's the guy that's going to precede the trial, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Now, they actually brought up 11 charges